Morning all, I'd like to take you to the Bled tournament of 1961 where Fischer had his first glimpse of absolute greatness in terms of finishing ahead of many of the strongest players from the former Soviet Union, the USSR. So here, in this game, I'd like to show you in round 18 of this grueling Bled tournament, Fischer was playing against Tigran Petrosian. Tigran Petrosian, as a reminder, was a Soviet Armenian grandmaster, a world chess champion from 1963 to 69. So this is historically an important clash, because actually in the year after this game, according to ChessGames.com, Tigran Petrosian, he did play quite a few games and he didn't lose a single game. He became an immovable object in chess terms. But okay, in this game, was he enough of an immovable object against the irresistible force of Robert James Fischer? So anyway, Tigran Petrosian was nicknamed Iron Tigran due to his almost impenetrable defensive playing style, which emphasized safety above all else. He was a candidate for the World Championship on 8 occasions: 1953, 56, 59, 62, that's the Curaçao tournament, 1971, 74, 77 and 1980. He won the World Championship in 1963 against Mikhail, successfully defended it in 1966 against Boris Spassky, and then lost it in 1969 to Boris Spassky. Thus he was the defending world champion or world championship candidate in 10 consecutive 3-year cycles. He won the Soviet Championship 4 times, 1959, 61, 69 and 75. He was recognized as the hardest player to beat in the history of chess by certain authors. So, as I mentioned, 1962, a year after this game, he did not seem to lose. So Fischer, playing white, kicked off with e4, his favourite move. Petrosian, though, in this tournament earlier, had actually lost another game. He had actually lost a game, rather. I'll say another game. he lost the game earlier against, let me find it for you. Who was the person that beat him? Portish beat him in round 7 of this tournament, and Fischer is now meeting Petrosian in a later round, round 18. Okay, so this is round 18. So e4, c6 from Tigran. Rock solid Caro-Kann. d4, d5, knight c3, and now Tigran takes on e4. Okay, knight takes e4. Now there's an interesting continuation, knight f6, but this would allow doubling of pawns. But it's for dynamic players, they have sometimes an interest in that. Bronstein Larsen sometimes play that. There's also bishop f5 is another move, very popular today. In fact, let's have a quick look at on Livebook here. Bishop f5 is actually the most popular move. Now knight d7 is the second most popular. That was what was played here. So bishop f5, 9,800 games. Knight d7, 5,008. Knight f6, we go down to 2,161 on my Livebook. Curiously, there's 46 games of h6, which I've never ever played myself. There's g6 with 10 games. Queen c7, 4 games. Anyway, so knight d7, a very solid system here. Knight f3, and now knight gf6. Black is not accepting double pawns here. He wants an exchange. If the knight goes to g3 here, I don't think this is doing white too many favours. The most popular move is knight takes f6, knight g3. Okay, 545 games, second most popular. So this is 836 to just take on f6. So most white players are content with taking on f6 here and trying for a small advantage. But it is an exchange of 2 pieces coming off. Bishop c4, okay. And now black doesn't really want to close in his own bishop. And the most popular move here is bishop f5. That was what was played. Very logical. And now we see the most popular move generally is white castling. Now Fischer chooses a more exotic move, queen e2, which is 46 games. Castling is 148. Now queen e2 reserves the possibility of castling queenside if this bishop gets out of the way. So in fact that's the plan here. After e6 to get the bishop out of the way, white is now free to castle queenside. Okay. And also you'll notice that potentially if white castles queenside, knight e5 might be a little bit annoying, and that could facilitate later maybe g4s and stuff like that. And we see here Petrosian's trademark, emphasizing safety above all else. You might think bishop e7, just get on with castling. That is the most popular move, but bishop g4 is also a popular move here, just pinning this knight. So in advance of any ideas of knight e5, trying to extinguish anything going on. White castles queenside, so without the threat of knight e5 now bishop e7. And it seems absolutely rock solid here, black's position. Fischer actually prompts black to take on f3. What to suggest here, apart from h3? Let's just put on a kibitzer. It seems quite a dry, bone dry position, or heading that way pretty soon. And if white's best is h3, it doesn't inspire too much confidence for being able to win this game. But h3 is indeed played, okay. And white, in theory, has a small advantage according to engines. Can we actually deduce what this advantage consists of here? If white doesn't go with the exchange of queens, well, engines suggest just retreating the bishop back. That does keep some of the tension going. Bishop e3, but also, you know, bishop e7 is mentioned, but bishop e3 might be a viable alternative here to taking on e7. But where is white's advantage? I think it's really getting close to absolute zero. So the immovable object is taking hold here against the irresistible force. By the way, that is a total paradox, because both cannot be true. It's actually a known paradox. So what's going to happen here? Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, king b1. Okay. And now, after rook d8, it does seem bone dry, this position, without much going on at all. Fischer plays queen e4, which may threaten to try and provoke a weakness if black castles to IH7, and that's about it. Black can just play g6. So black can just castle here if he wanted. It's no big deal. If he did castle, so bishop d3, g6, if h4, black's not really that much in trouble, because knight f6 or queen b4, these are both good moves there, and white really hasn't got much of an attack going on. But anyway, Petrosian's move is not even doing that, so if there's any sniff of danger there, he's avoiding it for the moment with b5. Of course, white doesn't really want to take on d5, but it's a monster knight in many respects. And now with b5, you know, c4 is being discouraged. So the bishop drops back. So c4 a bit discouraged, because black will get that b file with an attack against white's king. So this knight does seem as though it's pretty useful. And Petrosian now plays a5. The position looks about equal so far, with nothing much going on. This knight on d5 must surely be as good as the bishop here. c3, queen d6 as though an exchange of queens, and surely then it will soon be a draw. Fischer plays g3, and now a seemingly quite aggressive move. Black could play g6 if he wanted to try and castle, but maybe then there is a prospect of playing h4, as mentioned before, trying to get something going. But we see actually Petrosian working on the queen side here, not bothering about trying to prepare to castle. He actually just plays b4. Okay, and this changes the position just ever so slightly, and very, very slightly, that this pawn on a5, when b4 is played, it's slightly more vulnerable to attacks like this. So this is a tiny kind of weakness in the position. And actually I mentioned that Petrosian in an earlier round lost to Portish, and I actually played through that game, and there was actually an issue relating to a5 at some point. A queen went to a5 and it created some discomfort for black, and Petrosian actually ended up blundering a piece to Portish in that earlier round. So a5, if there's any Achilles heel with Petrosyan, it was exposed that maybe a5 is a problem to look out for. But okay, so if it's not king safety, going for some of Petrosyan's queenside pawns might be interesting. And in fact, after c4, knight f6, we indeed see that this seemingly pedantic idea of a5 being a target is made use of here with the move queen e5. It does attack a5. And you might think, well, can black just take on e5 here? Let's have a quick look. Queen takes e5, d takes knight d7, rook he1, and you might think this is a beautiful blockade on c5, but after bishop f1, white has a certain prospect here of bishop g2 and targeting c6, and it should be about equal, though it's not much in it again. But okay, so that was playable. So after queen e5, Petrosyan actually chose a different method. He played actually c5, and Fischer didn't really want to exchange queens. He wants to keep some tension going, and he does so with queen g5. And now we get a provocative move from Tigran. All of a sudden, you know, looking a lot of tactics and stuff. We get this move h6. So let's see what would happen now if queen takes g7. What is Tigran's response here? Well, the queen's kind of locked in there. Tigran's response would be the crafty king e7. Now, technically, the engines are indicating this is not without danger for black. Let's have a look. Bishop g6, attacking f7. That's protected, and it looks as though you wouldn't really want to do this with your queen. You wouldn't want to do this, but it turns out that d takes c5 here is interesting. Well, it can be, because it's trying to distract the queen away from e6. So queen takes c5, rook he1, and white is now threatening bishop takes f7. Let's have a quick look now. Is this really a threat? Or rook takes e6. Let's have a look. Rook hg8. This is all very tactical. Bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, check, check. And again, it's actually given us a minuscule advantage to white. Black's got the extra piece, and the king looks a bit in danger, but it's going to head to a draw, this position. So it's actually no big deal. Even this resourcefulness is no big deal. So queen takes g7. Anyway, the response would seem to be king e7, and the queen's kind of stuck there. It's very committal. So okay, in this position, actually, Fischer doesn't play queen takes g7. Just one more moment though about this. Here on queen c6, queen takes c5 might actually be one of the better moves. If queen c6, there's a little bit of danger, maybe tiny bit, with rook d6 here in this position, in this variation, rook d6, because now we're using that momentary pin on f7. So that's something to avoid. So maybe black's best is just to take on c5 here to avoid this rook d6. Okay, so anyway, that exciting moment of the game now over. We have the move queen takes c5 played instead of indulging the queen with queen takes g7. So queen takes c5, the queen's coming off. Time for most spectators to yawn. Time for the players to agree a draw, or is it? In our modern times, we have a player, Magnus Carlsen, who plays on and on sometimes, and sometimes gets a win where most grandmasters would have accepted the draw. So let's see what's happening here. Queen takes c5, d takes. It's not a very good extra pawn, and this bishop has potential to be not that good according to the knight. The knight can get to a nice blockade square. We see king e7, the rooks are connected. Black never needed to castle here. Now an interesting move, c6, which again means potentially this a5 might be a target at some point. Bear that in mind. Rook d6, rook he1, and now rook e5 to target that poor a5 pawn potentially. one day. After rook takes c6, this indeed happens now. Rook e5, that's protected. And it looks as though, hold on a sec, but in playing this move a lot of calculation was needed, wasn't it? Because of this skewer. But surely black would just take. In fact, Fischer plays this, and black can actually just take. Strangely though, Tigran, who wanting exchanges up until this point, didn't take on e4. This is really getting bone dry here. As dry as Nando's chicken gone wrong when they served it too quickly. So knight takes e4, rook takes e4. Where's the juice in this position? Where? So I don't know. You know, this looks absolutely equal. Is Petrosyan teasing Fischer? Well, his next move is based on a lot of calculation, I believe. He plays the move rook d6. And we know in a lot of Petrosyan games he's a master of blockade, and it seems here that in playing rook d6 he has to of course calculate both bishop takes a8 and rook takes d6. Let's have a quick look at rook takes d6 to see what was the reasoning here. Is it a pawn sack? Because he's no, he's not even a pawn down or anything. But he's going to be in this position after king takes d6, because white can insert here rook takes e6 before taking on a8. So it's a pawn sack for a potentially powerful blockade. So let's have a look at this. Bishop takes a8, and this is where Petrosyan's evaluations are getting probably excited by the prospect of a positional blockade, because after knight d7, bishop e4, king c5, it looks as though, you know, these pawns are away from the colour of the bishop. This is a beautiful blockade on the dark squares. Surely this will be potentially quite unpleasant for white. In fact, the king could come in here and the knight could come to c5 potentially, or even g5. It looks as though this is going to be totally impossible to win anyway. Even though white's a pawn up, it should be enough for black to hold. But anyway, in the game, actually, after rook d6, rook takes d6 wasn't chosen. In fact, Fischer invited the exchange of rooks like this, with bishop takes a8, rook takes d1. So he wants to exchange, potentially, this pawn for this pawn, an exchange of prisoners, as Ð$µஞ might say. So after king c1, rook f1, we have this exchange of prisoners. Rook takes a5, rook takes f2. But what's really happened as well is, all of a sudden, white might have a minuscule advantage going on here, because this king is actually quite active. These pawns, if this rook wasn't tying down the king, could potentially advance, but there is a passed c pawn as well to factor in now. Can black actually go wrong here? In this position, does the rook even need to move here? Does it need to go after material? An interesting idea might be just king d6, check, king c7, and the rook's tying down the king here. It's difficult for white to make progress, because also with c5 this knight d5 becomes possible. So this kind of position looks very, very hard to potentially win. So okay, so let's go back here. We see actually rook h2. If black can nab one or two of these pawns, then these pawns are going to be quite dangerous. But on the other hand, these pawns are quite dangerous. And we see here now c5, that danger pawn advancing. And now Petrosyan's banking on blockade with his king. He plays king d8. Okay, but now Fischer's next move. I mean, if he didn't play king d8, there's also another alternative though. And let's have a quick look at knight d7. Bishop c6 starts to be a bit dangerous, because it now threatens rook a7. King d8. It starts to look a bit dangerous with, you know, the king and knight there. But this position can just go into equal very easily if white's not careful. He's attacking the bishop, doesn't matter about rook a7. But in the game, okay, we see actually king d8. And now Fischer plays rook b5. So what does rook b5 do? As well as potentially winning this pawn, the rook can also cut off the king and also attack f7. f7 is an interesting weakness here. If the king tries to come to the rescue, f7 is left behind. And here things get really quite critical for black. Engine suggestion here is actually king c7. And for example, rook takes b4, knight d7, check, king c8. And this could be quite tricky. It looks quite dangerous, this position. If rook b5 takes a4, you know, white is getting an imbalance that maybe he wanted to try and win this game. The imbalance, you know, he's got the pawns here and black's got the pawns here. He's got winning chances as well as potential losing chances, but he's got this imbalance. But in the game, we don't see actually king c7 here in this position. We see actually rook takes h3. And things are getting a little bit dangerous now. Fischer plays actually check. And after king c7, check here. And this is now really, really bad. In fact, this king c7, was that even the best? No, engine suggests king d7 or king e7, but it's getting mighty tricky. If king d7, for example, how does white actually win this? Check. f7 might be offered. Check. You see that the imbalances are evident here. White's got the passed pawns. White's actually potentially now got a big advantage once f7 drops. The rook's on the 7th. This king is cut. This king's active. So that's the big difference, the king difference, with the rook on the 7th and the passed pawn. So actually white's getting a big advantage here. So something has gone actually badly wrong here after this check, that even these two moves probably losing now potentially. So, but in the game we see king c7. And now, in fact, after rook b7 check, the lesser evil moves, which still are not very appetizing at all, because white could take on f7 now, if nothing else. If king d8 or king c8, white can just take on f7. But in fact, Tigran Petrosian just ends it here. He plays king c6. I don't think he wants to suffer with his king on the back row. And can you guess what white plays here? Or maybe it was a blunder, maybe it was a genuine blunder, or maybe he just wanted to end the game quickly. So can you see what Fischer played here in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, Fischer's next move is getting a mating net with his own king. He plays king c4, and so threatening mates like this with the bishop on a8, or like this, rook takes f7, that will do, or rook e7, that will do. And you discover check here. The rook and knight can't check the king. All of a sudden, black's found himself in a mating net and has to resign here. So it was an interesting game. As I mentioned, go forward rather 1 year, 1962, and Petrosyan didn't lose a single game. He ended up winning the candidates, the Curaçao candidates, in 1962, becoming world champion, fending off against Boris Spassky as well 3 years later. So Petrosyan enjoyed 6 years as world champion, longer than most. A very, very solid player, a master of reducing risk, but somehow Fischer bypassed. He created a continuation where there was a potential for creating imbalances by playing. If we go back to the critical position, he headed for where the imbalances were by playing this move in this position, bishop takes a8. The imbalances which he generated were black's pawns which could be potentially mopped up, liberating potentially especially the c pawn, but it also turned out that the king which tried to rescue the situation was also subject to being mated, technical issues with the king and knight trying to fend off against this pressure on the queen side. I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.